Benson, one of 5 trustees of First Church in Boston. We also have a 12-member standing committee which supervises the operations of this church. Whether this is your first time at First Church in Boston or joined long ago and signed our book, we welcome you and are happy to have you here. We are the oldest church in Boston, founded in 1630 by the original settlers crossing the ocean from England. And we started as a Puritan church, but ultimately became a Unitarian church in the middle of the 19th century. So I'd like to welcome you and proceed with today's program.
Thank you, John, for those words of welcome. I would add to them, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to worship here at First Church in Boston this morning. It is my pleasure and joy to be worshiping with you. My name is Dr. Marc Loustau. I am a member of this church. The opening words this morning are from Leah Ongiri. Here we are, together, each facing our different human tasks, or maybe the same central one, to embrace the lessons life delivers, to discern and respond as we grow, to refuse harm and cherish flourishing. May we know ourselves as vessels of possibility, holders of each other's heartaches and tales of joy alike, weavers of one story in which we each have our part. I'd like to welcome Lynn to light our chalice, Lynn Benson. Each Sunday morning, we light the chalice, the symbol of our free faith, with these words. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and love, and to help one another. Now, as you are willing and able, we invite you to greet one another with a handshake or a wave as you are comfortable to welcome each and every one to this space this morning. One of the minister's most difficult tasks every Sunday morning is calling people back from the greetings. I would welcome you back and invite you to rise as you are willing and able to sing the opening hymn, number 126, Come Thou Font of Every Blessing. It's found on number 126 in your gray hymn. responsive reading this morning can be found in your order of service. I will read the regular text. I invite you to read the bold italics. A Lament by the Reverend Dr. David Breeden. We cry out in grief at the suffering we see. Preventable suffering, yet it continues on and on. When we feel overwhelmed, we when we feel overwhelmed, we know that to our right and to our left are the faces of caring, faces of companionship. Joining together, we find our refuge, we find our strength, we find our wisdom, we find our way forward. God of all names, God beyond all names, Holy One of peace and justice, we still our thoughts, slow our breath, deepen our being in the world's holiness. The world is holy, and yet there is affliction, so much hatred, so much brutality, so much wrong, so much, and we find ourselves once again aware that our knowledge of painful histories is too shallow. Our imaginations pale in the face of others' suffering. In the knowledge of these limitations, and yet love's limitless power to heal, may our hearts be tuned to each other so that we may yet be workers of peace, lovers of harmony, and servants of freedom, wherever human beings are bound in enmity and reprisal. Spirit of life and wisdom, guide the judgment of the world's leaders towards compassion, concern, justice, and peace. Lend them foresight in these complex times, and embolden our own hearts with the courage to speak truth where it will heal and set free. Because there is holiness in this world. Holiness wherever human beings are called to love against fear. And wherever we are present to each other above hopelessness and despair. In the name of this holy love that passes all understanding, may it be so. Amen. And now for the works and ministries of this congregation, First Church in Boston, I invite you to give as you are willing and able to support the valuable work of this congregation. Will you please be seated? I welcome Lynn to give us our reading this morning from the Gray Hymnal.
This is a unison reading, number 475 in your Gray Hymnal. We, the peoples of the United Nations. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small, to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom, and for these ends to practice tolerance and to live together in peace as good neighbors, to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, to ensure that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, to employ international machinery in the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all people, have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims.
Thank you, Lynn. I invite you to rise as you are willing and able to sing hymn number 160 in the Gray Hymnal, Far Too Long by Fear Divided. Seated. I have to say that the offertory music by Stephen Sondheim, Children Will Listen, I think that's the first time that I've heard that song since I became a father. My son will be 2 years old in January, and it hits home differently. It hit home differently. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the world was gripped by heart-rending images of Ukrainian refugees crossing the border. The news coverage was powerful, for me especially, because I have been to the places we saw on the news. I am a cultural anthropologist. I study Eastern Europe. For several years, I lived in Hungary and Romania, which share a border with Ukraine. 6 million refugees have left Ukraine. Nearly as many have fled the fighting only to stay in their country. They did not cross the border. These are internally displaced persons, or IDPs. There are 5.1 million internal refugees in Ukraine today, according to the Institute on Migration, an international nonprofit. Like refugees, IDPs have lost so much, even if they have not left their country. Displacement is traumatizing because refugees leave behind family and friends, co-workers and classmates. In addition to losing jobs and possessions, Ukraine's internal refugees have lost a grounding sense of social and psychological support. 1/3 of internally displaced persons experience some form of post-traumatic stress. Many Ukrainians suffer from chronic depression, anxiety, and panic disorders. Ukrainian IDPs report difficulty sleeping, irritability, anger, repetitive and self-harming thoughts and behaviors. At schools, children get into fights, teenagers abuse alcohol and drugs. There has been an alarming rise in domestic violence against Ukrainian women and children. Having fled a familiar social world, internal refugees find themselves in unfamiliar parts of Ukraine, and they feel alone, desperate, fearful, distrustful, and with a deep sense of uncertainty about their futures. Humanitarian organizations are increasingly hiring trauma response therapists to heal these invisible wounds of war. Since 2017, the United Nations, through the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, has urged humanitarian organizations to make mental health an integral part of all medical services. Ukraine is one of the first conflict zones where organizations are using therapists on a large scale throughout the country to help internal refugees. Earlier this year, the Christian Century magazine asked me to travel to Ukraine. I went on assignment to write about these new humanitarian mental health programs, to get to know the therapists who are doing this healing work. I traveled to Transcarpathia, Ukraine's most westerly region on the border with Slovakia and Hungary. Since the war began, 150,000 Ukrainians from the east and the south have settled in Transcarpathia. Dorcas International, a humanitarian organization, has an office in Transcarpathia. My first morning in Ukraine, I met 2 Dorcas International psychotherapists around a conference table at the organization's building. Their names are Natalia and Yana. They themselves are also from the east and the south. Natalia is from Kharkiv. She sat upright, calm and composed at the table. Before the war, she was a senior psychology professor, and to me, she looked very much the unperturbable role. Yana is in her 30s, from Dnipro. She had a high energy and this amazing circus of curly black hair around her shoulders. She used to run a school program for children with Down syndrome. Together, they had over 30 years of clinical psychotherapy experience. I came prepared to conduct a formal journalistic interview. On the table, I laid my pen and my paper, my cell phone, my electronic recorder. The women, on the other hand, wanted nothing to do with it. For 90 minutes, they laughed with each other, they joked, they disagreed, they debated, they sympathized, they listened patiently to each other. They clearly loved each other's company. They even got my translator to laugh. They were passionate about their work, and it was contagious. I started by asking Yana and Natalia about their experiences in Kharkiv and Dnipro, since they had both left their homes to work at Dorcas. Natalia replied she had stayed in Kharkiv even after her city fell to the invading Russian forces. Even though Russian soldiers were patrolling the streets, with 2 neighbors in her apartment building, she formed a volunteer humanitarian aid group. They got in Natalia's rickety old Honda and drove around her city collecting donations of flour and salt. Then they drove the ingredients to a restaurant. It used to be a high-end Italian trattoria. Now the owner was using the industrial ovens to bake bread. Natalia took the loaves to the elderly, people who could not leave their apartments because bombs were exploding around them. While countries have stepped in very generously with donations to Ukraine since the war began, small groups of volunteer aid workers, groups like Natalia's Neighbors, continue to perform important roles. They fill the gaps that Western groups are unable to fill. In June 2022, while Natalia was out delivering bread, a missile struck beside her car. The impact flipped the vehicle on its side. She suffered a concussion. Afterwards, she wanted to leave Kharkiv to recuperate. So when she saw that Dorcas was hiring in Transcarpathia, she applied and got the job. Then I turned to Yana, the younger of the 2. She has 2 sons, aged 4 and 14. I asked Yana about the particular challenges that refugee mothers experience. Childcare, she said. Childcare is a major problem. In Transcarpathia, kindergartens and nurseries were already overfull before the war. Without childcare, Yana went on, women can't get work. From a psychological perspective, this has a negative impact on their well-being. Many refugee women are accomplished professionals. They have 1, sometimes 2 master's degrees, she said. But when they relocate to Transcarpathia, they feel bored and frustrated, which adds to the trauma of witnessing brutality, the anxiety about not knowing where they will live, and grief at losing loved ones. It's like they are stuck on a permanent maternity leave, Yana said. Not some kind of relaxing vacation, but a never-ending internment. Simply put, they are bored, but it's a boredom that strikes deep. I looked at Yana, who had placed on the table a children's workbook that she had designed. She flipped open the cover and showed me exercises on emotional learning, prompts for children to draw pictures of faces experiencing different emotions. I thought Yana herself is an internal refugee and a mother, but she was not bored. She was engaged, and she is using her professional training. The international community is making her skills valuable to Ukrainian society. She is expressing herself in her work, helping others, healing her society. Then I looked at Natalia, and I thought back to what she had gone through, dodging craters in her city's streets, and then her concussion, a wound she had suffered in the fighting. I looked at Natalia in her prim beige sweater, composed, relaxed, smiling. Her elbows were perched perfectly on the table. She is an internal refugee too, and she might have felt alone, isolated. She might have felt fearful and distrustful. But what I saw instead was deep and mutual engagement, relaxed emotional responses, spontaneous laughter, as well as patient attention. In Ukraine today, in programs like the one that Dorcas runs, psychotherapists are healing themselves as well as their clients. Refugees are helping refugees. Women are using their professional training to rebuild Ukrainian society. They are making sure that their society does not retreat into trauma and woundedness. They help others maintain their emotional health in the face of Russian forces' brutal, indiscriminate terror. What is at stake in this war in Europe? Over the last month, the news in the US has been filled with stories about aid for Ukraine. The back and forth on the front pages has focused on dollar amounts, sometimes startling in their size. With all this talk about dollars and cents, we might get tricked into thinking that Ukraine is an economic asset. We might start to ask questions like, is this a smart investment? Will there be anything left of economic value after the war is done? But as always, we can go deeper. Look beneath the superficial economic calculus and ask more fundamental questions. What is at stake in our support for Ukraine? We can help ensure that in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years, Ukraine is a humane society. A humane society where people live without fear that they will experience brutalization and trauma, where they have compassion for each other, emotional resilience, and openness. A society where human beings treat each other humanely. What is at stake in Ukraine today? The survival of our human calling to treat each other humanely. This is how Ukrainian religious leaders, like Father Andrei Zelinsky, view the war. Zelinsky is a Catholic priest and a chaplain in the Ukrainian military. I read about Zelinsky in a profile on Inkstick, an online journal of justice-focused foreign policy commentary. Zelinsky, the chaplain, attends to war's individual wounds, a lot like Dorcas International's mental health professionals. We find ourselves at a time, Father Zelinsky says, when the greatest gift we have is in danger, the gift of our humanity. He continues, the pain, violence, and hatred of war make us psychologically reactive, emotionally defensive. We reject our emotions and close ourselves off from them. It paralyzes our humanity. Zelinsky ministers to soldiers in frontline trenches. He shares meals with them in their bunkers. He hears their confessions, weeps with them over their losses. He does this not just to help soldiers fight, not just for the short-term goal of restoring Ukraine's national borders, but also to help Ukrainians remain human and accomplish an equally important long-term goal. Victory for us, Zelinsky says, is not just kicking out the aggressor from our land. Victory is creating a society where a person feels their freedom and their dignity, and where a human being remains a human being. I want to repeat those words. We are creating a society where a person feels their freedom and their dignity, and where a human being can remain a human being. This is what's at stake when we support Ukraine, both by sending donations to humanitarian organizations and by advocating that the US government support Ukraine's war effort. We are supporting a self-defense effort that is, by virtue of the Russian invasion, violent, and it will continue to be so. But we can also help a people who are facing barbarousness fulfill their desire not to become barbarous themselves. Ukrainians today are striving to see that cruelty need not breed cruelty. Brutality need not breed brutality, and humanity might prevail. I urge you to donate to groups like Dorcas International to support mental health programs in Ukraine. You can find out more information at dorcas.org. That's dorcas.org. But we also have a responsibility to educate ourselves about international conflicts, to read sources that will help us bring our values to bear on US government policy, especially our religious values like freedom, dignity, humanity. Recently, I have started reading Inkstick, the journal that I referred to. It's a new foreign affairs magazine that, according to its masthead, works to center and amplify the voices of those who have been historically marginalized. Inkstick's writers want, quote, a more human and humane vision, end quote. So if you are feeling like I sometimes do, that money is really all that we're hearing about when it comes to American foreign policy, Inkstick has helped me find a deeper, more humane analysis. Like the chaplain Andriy Zelinsky, Yana, Natalia, and other Dorcas mental health professionals, many Ukrainians are helping each other remain human in the face of dehumanizing brutality. Amid the catastrophe, they are building a society where people will remain human and be humane to each other. Don't stop contemplating the beauty of the human heart, Father Zelinsky says. Remain human. That's our responsibility. May it be so. Amen. Will you join me in singing our concluding hymn, number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth? Extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now in our going, may God bless us and keep us. May the light of God shine from within us, be gracious unto us, and bring us peace. For this is the day we are given. Let us be glad and rejoice.